The cover page of One Punch Man chapter 182, titled Unascertained, features both Saitama and Tatsumaki looking at each other. A great one to close out their fight. More of a verbal fight than a physical one from Saitama's perspective though. Inside the hero apartment complex, several sizable energy readings would be detected, enough to actually break the meter. Inside the infirmary, we'd find these same two heroes as before. Air would take note of the continued disturbances, while Forte would get up to see what was going on for himself. But just as he did that, something would suddenly crash into the building. As much to Forte's disbelief, just above his head was none other than Saitama. Forte would shakily question what Saitama was doing. Meanwhile, this was nothing to our bald hero, and so he casually greeted Forte and questioned how his injuries were. Too stunned to respond, Forte would be told to go get some rest, as Saitama would leap from the vertical surface like a rocket, only to cataclysmically collide with the surrounding environment. Seeing all this, Forte had to reevaluate his priorities. He decided that the rematch could wait for now, taking Saitama's advice to heart. But Forte wasn't the only weakling in awe of this insane fight. The former members of the Blizzard group looked like they were watching Attack on Titan for the very first time. They were terrified by Tatsumaki's unrestricted rampage and would be left to wonder what could have possibly happened to make her that mad. That's when Eyelashes realized that by serving Fubuki, that's the sort of monster they're upsetting. And I'll tell you what, that car ride back home for these guys is going to stink. One of them, that I don't believe we've seen before, would wonder what was going on at headquarters for them to not be involved in an event of this magnitude. But that's when he saw something even more unbelievable. But to swiftly interrupt this would be Tatsumaki rushing forward. And would you look at that, she is at her limit. She slipped up by using too much energy, which was pretty embarrassing considering she was supposed to be testing Saitama. From here, it would be revealed that because Tatsumaki could never really let loose of their powers outside of deadly circumstances, she was having a lot of fun with Saitama. She didn't think this sort of thing could ever be possible with anyone that wasn't Blast, but was surprised by this weird bald man. Fun with strangers aside though, for the sake of her pride, Tatsumaki needed to finish Saitama off immediately. To do so, she'd give rise to the earth, quickly turning it into a sea of debris. In moments, it swallowed Saitama, and then some. Tatsumaki was terribly exhausted by this point. But unfortunately, for a moment, the ground would begin to move without her influence. Suddenly, Saitama would emerge from it all without any effort, completely unharmed. Tatsumaki couldn't believe her eyes and even had difficulty standing. Seeing her struggle, Saitama would urge her not to push herself too much, as she would need to have enough energy to talk things out. But this only annoyed Tatsumaki, who refused to be looked down on, despite her height. Tatsumaki would telekinetically lift Saitama, who was really enjoying the experience. As it turns out, Tatsumaki is the one struggling. Saitama was casually defying the laws of physics, and it was way too heavy for Tatsumaki to handle. Meanwhile, she was exerting enough force to send something of his size to space immediately. Tatsumaki was really pushing her limits here, and her anger was only getting worse. Seeing her trip out like this, Saitama tried to calm Tatsumaki down by reminding her that he's not her enemy. Running on empty, Tatsumaki didn't want to hear it and wasn't aiming to be friends with him at all. This was beginning to be a bit sad from Saitama's perspective. He felt like she was underestimating the power of human relationships. After all, she couldn't even handle the power of her sister's acquaintance. Maybe Saitama's true power was friendship all along. And listen, this man Saitama is not slick. He friend-zoned her sister and doubled down on it, all while trying to get Tatsumaki to open up. Tatsumaki at this point couldn't handle the strain anymore and would drop down on her knees in front of Saitama. She kept giving it all she had until she literally passed out. During this, she'd remember the words of her savior, Blast, that when the time comes, she shouldn't expect anyone to come save her. He told her to also protect her family. Tatsumaki then based her entire personality and outlook on these two sentences. Having been sold by her parents, the only family she sought to protect was Fubuki. At this age, Fubuki was rocking a Dora haircut and even had a monkey and a fox toy. No way that's a coincidence, right? Anyways, when Tatsumaki suddenly appeared in Fubuki's room like the Avatar planning to take her away, 4 Tsukuyomi members pulled up on her like the Paths of Pain. But they had no idea how powerful Tatsumaki was now and were ruthlessly slaughtered. It was so horrific, they couldn't even show us. Good thing preschooler Fubuki was there to watch every second of it. When her bloody-handed murderer of a sister reached out to her offering protection, Fubuki resisted. This rejection was the awakening of her latent Esper abilities. Tatsumaki blamed herself for this, considering Fubuki's Esper powers to be her own fault, unnecessarily placing her sister in harm's way. Above all else, she felt an obligation to protect Fubuki by her lonesome. Imagining things, Tatsumaki would be brought back to that fateful day that changed her outlook forever. There she saw Blast with his back turned to her. Having not seen him for quite some time, she was astonished. But as he began to walk away, she'd cry out for him not to leave her. She continued to chase after him as fast as she could, as it would be said that the only adult who set Tatsumaki free was Blast. She thinks very highly of Blast and believes that he'll respect her once he sees how strong she's become. Which, if you remember, just before Sage Centipede came out, although she was knocked out, Blast was actually pretty proud of her. But it's deeper than just that, because Tatsumaki believes that Blast will teach her a better way to live her life. Which is honestly pretty sad. She'd cry out about how hard she's tried. He'd stop for a moment, and she'd continue to admit that nothing seems to work. This is the most emotionally vulnerable we've ever seen Tatsumaki be, and her body language says it all. She doesn't want everyone to be afraid of her, but she's afraid that if she lets her guard down, things will go back to how they were before. Here, she'd finally ask him what she should do. Blast would stop for a moment, then turn to her with a light peeking just past his face. But before long, this light would be blinding as Tatsumaki would need to shield herself. In reality, the true ocular assailant was Saitama, because you can't have a bald guy in anime without solar flare. Completely done with everything, Tatsumaki opened her eyes and sat up while Saitama checked in on her. Tatsumaki was totally deflated. Saitama would wonder if she was done. He planned on keeping others away from Tatsumaki's rampage, but he couldn't contain her. Saitama wasn't sure what sort of training espers do, but he was impressed by how much he assumes Tatsumaki does. And listen, although she's not on Tatsumaki's level, nowhere near it, for him to compliment her is a pretty big deal. He doesn't do that very often. It's clear that this meant something to Tatsumaki, but being the tsundere that she is, would dismiss his words as worthless, which Saitama took as a sign that she's probably fine. With that, he was going to give her one more lecture before leaving. His message was simple. Esper or not, she can live her life however she wants to, but she should always be mindful not to break other people's stuff. Then telling her that she'll be a great hero if she can follow that, as he placed his hand on her head. And just like that, Tatsumaki has a whole new personality trait. After saying this, Saitama would begin to leave as Tatsumaki would give chase, telling him to hold on. But grabbing his attention would be the arrival of Fubuki. Fubuki would acknowledge her sister's call by expressing that she's disbanded her group. With a serious look on her face, Fubuki would agree with her sister's outlook, expressing her plan to fight alone, just like Tatsumaki. Tatsumaki appreciated her sister's sentiment, but it was clear to her that that breakup wasn't exactly mutual. The many members of the Blizzard group would show up out of breath, much to their former leader's surprise. They would all make a mess in their pants again when they saw the demented expression on Tatsumaki's face. They were extremely terrified, but Eyelashes would force himself to speak, as everything they'd been through would have been for nothing otherwise. Simultaneously bowing and yelling out, they begged Tatsumaki to allow them to serve Fubuki, all while promising to become stronger. This was a difficult situation for Fubuki. But as Tatsumaki prepared to annihilate them, Fubuki would interrupt with her own power, turned against them. After blowing them back with Hellstorm, Fubuki would beg her sister to let her handle things. With a frazzled expression, Fubuki would mock them for coming with illusions of facing Tatsumaki when they can't even handle her strength. She'd tell them to all stand up as they cried out her name when they did. This low-level conflict was really overwhelming for Saitama and Tatsumaki. Fubuki would continue blasting her former forces. During this, Saitama would look over to Tatsumaki. He'd wonder why she doesn't just let them be together. Tatsumaki would immediately protest, as it wasn't any of his concern. With this, Saitama would admit to her that before his muscle training, he couldn't even handle a wolf-level disaster. A revelation that totally took Tatsumaki off guard. Saitama, again being like a reliable big brother in this chapter, would tell her that even if they're weak now, the future is unknown. No one can know for certain what their limit truly is. Pretty inspiring stuff. Tatsumaki would reluctantly comply. Picking Fubuki up and taking her away like a kid at the park, Tatsumaki would put an end to the festivities. She'd admit that despite originally coming here to handle Psychos, she used up too much of her energy playing around. She'd then hover up a bit and slap onto Saitama's head while admitting to only be letting them go based on the bald guy's request. But would leave them with a grim reminder that if anything happens to Fubuki, that she will never forgive them. Despite their fear, they'd all agree to her terms. Before leaving, Tatsumaki would stop for a second and call out to Saitama. While pouting and looking to the side, she'd tell him that the test still wasn't over. Having found her new favorite toy, Tatsumaki would vow to surprise him with another test when she feels like it, even telling him that he should be grateful. Saitama wanted nothing to do with that nonsense. Tatsumaki would protest his refusal, while Fubuki was in awe that her sister actually listened to Saitama. The idea of her sister actually listening to another person's opinion was unheard of. Even the Blizzard group is questioning who Saitama really is. It's crazy how many characters have some idea of how strong Saitama is now. Nobody outside of Genos actually knows how crazy his feats can get, but things have certainly changed since the Monster Association arc. Let me know how you guys feel about more characters knowing Saitama's true power. From here, he would say goodbye to them, all while also managing to tell Tatsumaki to be on her best behavior, which she scoffed at. To close things out, however, we would have that same Mohawk member of the Blizzard group from before go to Fubuki and tell her what he saw, which shocked her too. What do you think happened? As always, I'm Slice of Otaku. Thank you all so much for watching and have an awesome day. I love you.